Well, I'm mainly a painter, but around that central activity of thinking about paintings is a lot of stuff like drawing, but also in recent years making objects, which I resist calling sculptures, but they're like paintings that go around corners. The idea of artists with imperfect vision is quite an exciting thing for me because it throws into highlight the whole subjectivity of vision in general, and so I've been quite short-sighted for most of my life, and I found that actually sometimes when I'm working close to the canvas, it helps just to take the glasses off and tune in to this sort of macro distance, this engagement between me and the painting. And to even look from a distance without glasses sometimes reveals something, a subtle weird colour change or a kind of change of emphasis that you don't notice when you've got sort of highly detailed information in the visual field in front of you. I almost try and avoid too much significance when I start working, really. So I might use things I see on the pavement on my way to the tube station as a kind of sounding board or something to bounce your imagination off. I needed a way to structure paintings that wasn't dependent on subject matter, that I could apply to many different situations. I evolved a way of working which means I work with very small marks, building up in layers gradually, and it means I call it a bubblescape. It means I can change colours, change the density and texture of the paint very, very gradually across the surface. It just suits me as well temperamentally to have a way of working that involves these small marks and means I don't have to anticipate too much about or make huge decisions about colour or density or thickness because I kind of creep up on them. Part of the quality of the work for me depends on me spending a lot of time just sort of staring at stuff in the studio. But I do want to talk about what's happening around me in the world, how things affect me. For example, with the case of the shooting of Mark Duggan, I know the exact spot that happened. It's somewhere I pass every week. And that is a very unremarkable piece of railings and some grass. And in your mind, when you know something's happened there, it becomes a sort of unspoken memorial for that event. Embedded significance, and hopefully that's one of the things I can try and sneak up on in the paintings. I think everyone needs stories too. I mean, artists are maybe very attuned to picking up interesting things without having a rational reason for doing it, but other people perhaps to sort of interpret what's been made. The joy of being part of this whole project, the Art360 project, is working with a curator looking at just sort of going through things. They seem to be points of correspondence with all sorts of other art events that might have happened at the same time that work was made. To think about people around me, fellow students who were working with particularly with film, and the freedom they had to make jumps between different kinds of space, zoom in, to pan around, and to make jumps between different times as well, all held together with the sort of linear narrative of a film. And I was thinking, how can I do that in a painting? Having things that look like photographs embedded within the paintings is quite important. And it brings to the fore the question of what kind of time is embedded in a painting, which is a beautifully complex notion. The idea that a painting contains a sandwich of time, the time it took to complete for the artist, but also the time taken to apprehend it. You might glance at them in passing and then come back 5 years later and take a longer look at a painting in a museum. The painting doesn't mind, but it has this wonderfully complex relationship to time. I was fortunate, I think, to be living in East London through the 1980s after I graduated from art school, at a time when London was going through tremendous changes. And that meant that you were sort of cheek by jowl with lots of other artists with whom you might share some temporary allegiance, but whose work maybe would subsequently go off in other directions. But as you reflect back, and the project has encouraged me obviously to do that, to sort of dig up the archive files and look back at older work, you realise it did have a wider context and was inextricably bound up with all sorts of things that were happening at the time you made the work. And part of the enjoyment for me is been trying to sort of tease out that context, that wider cultural context, that allows people to make sense of where work has come from. As well as having Amanpreet Sandhu, the curator, start to pull out some of these narratives, it was her idea to also bring in a conservator, Harriet Pearson, to have a look at the physical state of everything. Not only the work itself, but the documentation I had of it, the photographs, negatives, sketchbooks and notebooks with things that I'd used masking tape to stick down, So she was great at sort of picking up on what I was trying to do and not saying, no, you should be using some other kind of materials, or you should be doing everything in a completely different way. And think what were the priorities for ensuring the physical integrity of the work and the documentation for the future. Specific examples of things that are easy to change really, but unless you think about it, you don't, is the bubble wrap, which gets used very expediently by lots of artists, is really quite bad news for paintings in terms of like becoming imprinted or physically stuck onto the surface of a painting. And there are certain kinds of PVC or polythene that I'd had, these big plastic pockets that I'd stuffed drawings in over the years, which also there's some sort of chemical transaction that starts to take place between the wrapping, the thing you've used to try and protect the artifact in the first place, and it's actually sort of leaching into the artwork. There's a sort of Faustian pact to be drawn up between the need to hang on to work. The value of space means that you're constantly having to think, well, do I need to keep this? And should I keep it? I've regretted, I think, every work that I've decided to let go of, although there kind of is a freedom in letting go. If there was a vast sort of storage facility somewhere else where you could ship things off to and know it'd be reasonably looked after, obviously that would be fantastic, but that might be asking for something that's just never going to happen.